Hello, and welcome back to the Argyle CFO Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. We would love to hear from you. So during the session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us today. Now, let's get started. Without further delay, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Caroline McAuliffe, Senior Vice President, Head of Financial Planning Analysis and Procurement, Fannie Mae. We're super excited to have Caroline with us for a keynote presentation titled Scenario Planning for Financial Resilience, Preparing for the Unknown. Welcome, Caroline. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Nick. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. So over the past several years, I focused on transforming FP&A and procurement from transactional functions into strategic partners, right? So functions that just don't report on numbers or source contracts, but really help shape the strategy and drive enterprise performance. And today, I'd like to talk to you about scenario planning for financial resilience and how we prepare for the unknown, because I feel that's becoming an increasingly important topic, right? In a world that feels more volatile and uncertain than ever, right? Scenario planning is just, for me, not a nice to have, it's actually essentials. And as FP&A professionals, you're actually in a unique position. You hold the data, and you really sit at the intersection of finance and the business. So you really do have the potential to influence not only what numbers gets reported, but actually what gets decided. So I want us to explore today how we can build frameworks, teams, and mindsets that help organizations not just survive in uncertainty, but actually use it as a springboard for agility and growth. So how do we get there? So first, I just want to talk to you about what's the role of FP&A in building resilience. So traditionally, FP&A was really about budgeting, forecasting, variance analysis, useful and necessary, but honestly, increasingly insufficient. I keep telling my teams what got us there isn't going to be what keep us here, right? And so for me, the business environment has shifted. Economic cycles are shorter, regulation is more dynamic, the technology is disruptive and at increasingly faster rate, right? And competitive advantage often comes from speed. So in this context, finance absolutely needs to evolve into a strategic advisor. And we've been saying that for the past 15 years. But how do we actually do that? Well, for me, scenario planning is actually a perfect example of that evolution. It's not simply about what will happen, right, with the forecast, but about what could happen and how do we respond to it. It's about giving the leadership not just a forecast, here's your numbers, but actually here are your options, right? Not just a plan, but a response framework. And for me, FP&A is really the function that can bridge really data and insight and execution. And when you become a trusted advisor to the management committee and business leaders in your organization, then you really elevate your function from just producing number to shaping decisions, right? And that's the best feeling. So how do we get there? So I'll break this into 3 pillars: foundation, then the modeling in itself, and then the integration. So pillar 1, automation. You need to simplify and automate the foundation, right? You cannot build a future-proof scenario modeling if your foundation is shaky. Too many teams in FP&A currently still spend most of their time reconciling spreadsheets, debating definitions, creating manual reports. The goal is really to free your team from that so that then they can focus on really the insight, right? So at my organization and in previous organization, we always worked at, part of our roadmap was always automating large portion of the routine reporting, which can be so time consuming. right? Standardizing data definitions across divisions, across finance, right? And really working at cleaning up the data. And then consolidating all the spreadsheets that we can have in the FP&A world, right, into one single common platform and tool, right? Once you've really worked at simplifying and automating the foundation, that's going to free up a lot of your team capacity, right? You're going to eliminate the manual task, or at least like 80% of it. And that's when your team can really spend less time on what happened, reporting on the numbers, right? And on the past, and more time on what could happen, which is really where we see the real value of an FP&A team, right? So that's first step. Then second step, pillar 2, once your foundation is stable, that's when you have the ability to really shift from static forecasts to driver-based scenario models. How do you do that? Well, first, you need to identify the key levers in your business, right? Volume and price on the sales side, cost and the different components of the cost. On the expense side, right, are you mostly a labor and workforce type of business? Do you have other type of costs? What's the regulation that environment that you operate into? What are the tech investment? Are they particularly heavy in your cost base? What type of tech investment, right? And build models that allow you to test what if questions quickly. And so you don't need to start big with a tool to put your models in. You can start just with Excel, and as then you perfect them, then the next level of good is really to bring that into a tool, because that's going to allow you more like a real-time update of your models rather than in Excel. But you can definitely start there. For instance, some of the questions, that we're asking in our models. What if interest rates move by X basis points? What if we accelerate our digital investment by Y? What if regulation changes this business model by Z, right? And by linking all of those drivers that you've identified for your respective company to your model, you give the business leaders the ability to respond, but not just analyze, right? And also, I think for me, one important step, right, once you have that and you're able to use this to generate discussions, right, make sure you embed those scenario refreshes into your cadence, quarterly or even monthly refreshes aligned with real-time business conditions, right? Scenario planning, it should not be just an annual exercise that you do when you do the budget and then you tuck it away on a shelf. It should really be integrated into your FP&A cadence, monthly reporting or quarterly forecast, and be part of the discussions you're having with the management committee and the different business leaders across your organization. And then the third pillar, the third condition here for success is really to integrate what I call cross-functional thinking, right? When you think about the scenarios, right, and scenario planning, they're rarely purely financial, right? It rarely relies only on financial metrics like, I don't know, like interest rate increase, for example, right? They also need to include operational levers, right? I bet in most of your companies it's the case, right? Therefore, you need to integrate and have discussion with operations, technology, procurement, risk, right? And really understand like what's their assumption, what are they predicting, right? For procurement, hey, what do we see on the average increase rate for our, the hardware, the hardware sourcing or software sourcing, right? If those are like big component of your cost base, right? When finance sits alone, you miss the full picture. So you really need to make sure you're there to coordinate more of an enterprise view of the drivers and how the drivers will evolve in the future, right? So practical example that just in one of the recent transformation I led, I partnered with our technology team, right, and procurement functions to simulate the costs timing and risk of different digital investment paths, right? And because we included those functions in the scenario planning, then the resulting model really gained credibility. It was just not FP&A on their end, cooking the numbers and coming up with things, right? It was really something that was more like enterprise wide and more important. And so you really gain credibility, right, by including other people in the discussion. And more importantly, then you are able to serve options, that the business can act on confidently. Okay. And because also finance was facilitating that cross-functional discussion, we were no longer just the number guys alone. We were strategic partners driving business decisions, and that is really the best feeling. Um, so I want to share here some lessons, I've learned from leading transformation programs, whether they are in FP&A or procurement, and lessons here that we can apply directly to scenario planning and resilience. So first, lesson one: talent and mindset matter most. You can have the best tool, the best models, in Excel or in a more perfect tool, right? If your team is fixated on spreadsheets and past variances, you won't move to true advisory mode, right? So one of the things I'm really constantly doing is really focusing on developing high-performing teams, upskilling the team into strategic thinking, and also repositioning roles when needed, right? And when your team start to think, okay, how do we help the business decide rather than how do we finish the report and get the numbers out, that's when you know you got it right. And when you know that they have the right mindset, right? And that mindset shift will really fuel the transformation and how the business sees FP&A and the value FP&A brings to the table. So that for me is table stake. If there's only one thing that you should start focusing on, is this first one. Okay. So then second lesson, automation is just an enabler. It's not the end, right? We standardized and automated many of our processes. But as I said earlier, that was really here, like, table stakes. The real value started to surface when we were able to redirect that time toward foresight and decision support, right? And scenario models became more meaningful because our team had the capacity to build the models, interpret them, not just crunch data on forecasts, right? And one thing that's really important, right, when you think about like talent and automation, is on the side, right, to really make sure we help our talent, our teams, like understand like the shift that was happening, the automation, and what do they do with their free time, and how do we make sure we focus them on the right thing. We actually like develop what we call a digital talent curriculum, right? And helping them to really shift towards more that advisor like mindsets, and understanding what automation was bringing to them, letting go of the manual task, which sometimes can be like very scary for our teams, right? They find comfort in calculating accruals manually, producing reports manually, right? And suddenly you're like, no, thank you, but all of that is automated. But here's how you can spend your time, and here's how we would really want you to use your skill sets. There's a shift to happen there, and it needs to happen with coaching and with training. And then the third lesson, so beside like talent, automation, right, and training around the automation, the third one is really embed scenario thinking into governance and the culture, right? We establish regular scenario reviews with business leaders, Now that's part of just the monthly discussions we have with a certain number of them, right? We're tying scenario outcomes to resource allocation decisions, right? It's no longer, oh, those scenario on the side, we discuss them, yeah, they all sound good. No, we're actually embed them, right? And they're really part of the discussions at the investment committees on, how we think of reallocating resources, from one part of the company to the other, right? And we also use them to hold accountability for making decisions, right, based on those models, right? We're not just creating them, we're actually like framing scenario planning, so it's really part of how we operate the company. It's not a separate project, it is actually critical on how we use it, to govern and to operate the company. Um, so I just want to make sure we leave time for Q&A. So I'm going to wrap up this, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So to wrap up, right, to sum this up, true financial resilience, it's not about predicting the future. No one has a crystal ball. It's about being ready for it and being ready for the multiple variations, right, of scenarios that could happen, right? And scenario planning, once it's really embedded into your FP&A practices, it really gives you a way to translate ambiguity into action, right? And finance and FP&A can really lead this shift, not just by building the models, but by helping the business decide, act, and adapt, right? So your role in FP&A, for me, it's not to remove uncertainty, right? But your job is actually to make your organization sort of confident in it, right? Confident knowing that they have the tools to have like more clarity and make better decisions. And when finance and FP&A becomes the function that brings clarity, momentum, and results in the face of the unknown, that's when you know that you are like really becoming a strategic enabler for the business. All right, Nick, do we have questions in the audience?
Yes, Caroline, we sure do.
Okay.
Here's a question from the audience.
Yeah.
What core elements make a scenario planning model resilient enough to account for sudden market shifts or geopolitical disruptions?
All right. So for me, it's really about planning for multiple. So first, you have to identify which one are the drivers that really have impact on your business. Okay. In terms of external factors, right? Is it inflation and just mostly inflation? Is it inflation and interest rate for some of us who are in the financial sector, right? If it's, inflation, interest rate, and others, right? But you can't lose yourself in 20 different inputs, right? You have to select the few ones that you feel are going to really have like a large impact, right? Because the more input you're going to have, the more complex your scenario is going to be. And then the less you'll be able to actually explain the variation from one scenario to the other, because you'll be lost into your like 25 different external inputs. So I wouldn't suggest like starting there, right? And so you have to really focus on what are the ones that are important to you, right? And then my advice would be to make sure you have valid scenarios, like to test them, right, with business leaders and to test the outcomes, right? And also make sure that you plan for a tool that's going to give you the flexibility into tweaking the scenarios, right? What I've noticed is that if we go into a discussion with the business leaders and we plan for scenario 1, 2, 3, Usually they will index on one scenario, and then you'll end up going into scenario 2A, 2B, 2C, and then 2B is really interesting, and where it's going to be 2B1, 2B2, 2B3. And that's how you refine as an organization, where you think what is going to be like the most likely scenarios, and where the one you need to be like really prepared to respond.
Great. Here's another question. How can FP&A teams evolve traditional forecasting methods to build more dynamic and adaptive rolling forecasts?
Yeah. So great question. And so you probably are all at different stage in your forecasting maturity life, right? Um, some companies, um, actually, let me start there. A lot of companies are forecasting monthly, right? Thinking that it's going to give them like the best precisions. What we found out in my two previous organization is actually giving you a false of sense precision, and it's actually it's very time consuming, right? And you're always in like chasing the perfect number, almost at the cost of missing the big picture. So in my current organization, my previous one, we moved to quarterly forecasting, right? By defocusing from the monthly and from the precision to focusing more on the quarterly and on the big shifts, and then of course, in the off months, we adjust, right? For the big shift, we adjust our forecast, but we don't do like a bottoms up forecast every month, right? Now that's quarterly. We were able to actually create capacity to focus the team on the rolling forecast, right? And really shifting from that calendar year view that we're all experiencing in FP&A, right? Where when it's February, you just think about like the rest of the year. And when it's July, you just focus on the rest of the year. And maybe when it's September, October, you start thinking about the next year, right? And by freeing up the time of the team, right, and really have them stop doing bottoms up forecasts like every month and giving us a full sense of precision, we've actually been able to refocus that time on spending more time on more like a 2 years view, right? And it takes time actually to get there, right? It's not a flip you're going to switch by, we're going to actually remove the monthly forecast. Let's focus on quarterly, but let's make this quarterly 2 years out. It takes some training, and it's a muscle that you need to exercise, right? And so we've been at it for the past 2 years, and I think now I see the teams becoming way more fluent in it, and having more that ability into thinking into like a 2 years, like a rolling forecast cycle, right? So that's the path, that we've followed in my current and previous organization.
Okay, here's another question. What tools or data sources are most valuable when integrating external economic indicators into financial models?
That's an interesting question, because for me, the tools are, it's almost like irrelevant, right? Because either it depends on the complexity of your model, right? And so the complexity of your model is going to dictate the tools that you're going to host it into. So like simple model, you can handle that in Excel, and then more complicated model, you'll have to go with more like refined like tools. I know for us, for our forecast, especially we did a lot of like scenario planning on our like expense side, and we started in Excel just to get our training wheels on. And then as our scenario became more and more complex, and we needed to pick up into just calculation speed, and just being also able to it was just taking us too much time to actually like update all of the assumptions and see the different outcomes, imagine like in some discussions with the CFO and the CEO, right? We're a Fortune 25 company, like, oh, yeah, so thanks for the input. We'll get back to you on the outcome of those scenarios tomorrow. So hold your thoughts, right? So it wasn't possible. So we actually starting to move our model into our like forecasting and planning tools that often, with a bit of development dollars, are able to host those models. It's not like you have to buy like separate tools. You can host them in your forecasting tool, forecasting and budgeting tool if you have one.
Great. Here's another question. How can finance leaders balance long-term strategic planning with the need for rapid real-time adjustments during periods of volatility?
That's a good question, and I think a question that we're all of us, in leadership roles on the FP&A side, right? Or whether you're a CFO or you're a head of FP&A. I think it's all a question that we're trying to answer, right? It's how do you strike that balance between making the right long-term decisions with like short-term expectations, on the street, if you're a publicly traded company, or if you're board, if you're a private company. I'd say, my role as I see it, right, and how I'm trying to strike that balance the best I can, is to be that sounding board, right, to the management committee or to a division leader, and always be the person who's going to remind them, yes, I know you told the board you were going to achieve this metric, but actually also like think about this and the long-term impact, right? So I think our role in FP&A is to be and if you're a CFO of a company, right, is to be that kind of like sounding board who's going to really make sure you balance decisions. But honestly, there's no secret recipe for that. I think it's a constant watching yourself, right? I'll give you like an example. Like recently, right, we were discussing tech investments, right, and certain tech investments generate more capitalization than others, right? Which sounds appealing in terms of like short-term P&L impact, right? Less, when you think about the long term, right? And so here, my role in this, as we're discussing, like the profile our investment portfolio, was really to explain like here's the impact on the short term, but then here's going to be the impact in the out years if we go with an investment, with a tech investment path, with this profile, right? So kind of like gave a non-answer, because I don't think there's a secret recipe. I think it takes like art more than science to actually strike the right balance there, but it's absolutely our role in finance to help the business leaders and the management committee, remind them like of the balance we need to strike there.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
What organizational processes or communication structures help ensure scenario planning insights translate into timely business action?
Good question. I'd say it's really it's almost not about processes. It's about the relationship and the credibility you build as an FP&A team, and whether you have the ear, from your CFO, your CEO, the different business leaders, right, leading the different divisions, if that's how your company is structured, right? And so for me, I spend a lot of time like doing like stakeholder management, right? Being out there, explaining what we bring to the table, explaining like our models, and really making them like part of our discussions. And I think when you gain that credibility, then now I realize people like come to me for all sorts of questions, right? And when they want like quick insight, quick decisions, and we're producing the numbers quickly, we refine scenarios for them, right? You build that credibility and trust, and you become really that trusted advisor that people go to you before making decisions, right? But that means that you've done before like everything that I spoke about, right? The automation to free up your team capacity, upskilling the team, etc. So it's a journey to get there.
Great. Well, thank you again, Caroline, for such an awesome keynote. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today.
All right.
This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. And this officially concludes the Argyle CFO Leadership Forum. Thank you again for joining us today and engaging in our content. We look forward to seeing you at our next Argyle digital event soon. Have a great rest of your day.